family member died, they were laid in the middle of the, living room or parlor, and the community would come to visit. They come to pay their respects to the deceased and their family, and to bring them food and to share stories and to participate in a wake. And oftentimes they would parade the casket that they probably made themselves all through the streets of the community where they would lay this person to rest. And so the discussion and the idea of death was so very much a part of life for them. I want to kind of just pause there and just do a little reading here. It's very short, by an Irish priest and philosopher. His name's John O'Donoghue. Some of you might be familiar with his work, but one of the reasons I love poetry and prose when we talk about death and dying is because it has a way about it, the language of poetry and prose, that really sum up the existential experience of death and dying. So I'm just going to read this for you. It's called For Death. From the moment you were born, your death has walked beside you. Though it seldom shows its face, you still feel its empty touch. When fear invades your life, or when what you love is lost, or inner damage is incurred. Yet when destiny draws you into these spaces of poverty, and your heart stays generous until some door opens into the light, you are quietly befriending your death, so that you will have no need to fear when your time comes to turn and leave. That the silent presence of your death would call your life to attention, wake you up to how scarce your time is, and to the urgency to become free and equal to call of your destiny. That you would gather yourself and decide carefully how you now can live the life you would love to look back on from your deathbed. And I love that last paragraph in particular. It gives me goosebumps. That you would gather yourself and decide carefully how you can now live the life you would love to look back on from your deathbed. I have a lot of people in my own tribe, family and friends. I've been doing this work professionally on different levels in different places, hospital, community, hospice, everywhere, for like 40 years. And my family and friends always say to me, like, how can you work with in such a sad area? And it's always sadness. How can you do that all the time? Like, don't you get attached to these people? Well, of course I do. I'm a human being. But I also say to them, it's with such privilege, because working with the dying have taught me how to live my life without regret. Because one of my professional roles is to help process regrets with people that are passing, that are about to die. And it's so that they can make that transition peacefully, knowing that they've kind of come full circle and they've tidied up all their unfinished business and they have no regrets. So I've heard a lot of deathbed regrets. And so in terms of impacting my life, whenever I have to make a big decision, I often will take a step back and think, how am I going to feel about this at the end of my life? Like, am I going to feel proud of this decision? Am I going to feel guilt around this decision? Will I feel any shame attached to it? Because these are the things people carry with them. So working with the dying has taught me how to live. And it's such sacred and wonderful work. So in the spirit of advanced care planning this week, one word I would use around looking at end of life and say a good death is the word communication. And I'll be using that again and again and again. Communication, communication, communication. So not only in the written form by doing your advanced care directives and getting all that paperwork and having all of your wishes down on paper, but also having your power of attorneys in place, being able to verbalize to your people that are going to represent you should you be incapacitated, exactly what your wishes are will give you some control over how things go down at the end of life. And it's just so important, because when we get in a situation where we're face to face with our own mortality, things can get very chaotic. It can be really confusing. People are at the heights of emotionality. And so if we have everything in place for ourselves, for our family members, for the people that are going to care for us at the hospital or the hospice, everybody will know and everybody will be on the same page. It will make the experience so much better. So we kind of talk about good death, bad death, or respectful death um, versus death with dignity versus, not death with dignity. So these are all kind of terms, but there is some research attached. So according to the research, there's 11 areas that constitute a good death or dying well. The three main areas found throughout all the groups were being able to give specific information, so that's communication, as to how they wanted to die, that they would want to be pain-free, and to experience emotional well-being by addressing the quality of life that they want in their time before death. Other factors that were included in a good death were religion or spirituality, or having a sense of completion over their lives. The dying wants to make choices about the treatment they receive, being treated in a dignified manner, and having a good relationship with the treating providers. Being with family members and saying goodbye is also important in a good death. Often the dying has visions of loved ones that come to visit, and they find this very comforting. And I'm going to talk more about that specific thing later on. Having a respectful death reflects a model in which the dying, the family, and professionals all work together and support each other with the goal of improving end-of-life care and achieving the very best possible outcome for the individual who is facing his or her imminent death. Now, you would say, well, that's a no-brainer, but unfortunately, more times than not, this communication has not been clearly mapped out, and there's a lot of decisions that are made unilaterally, or there's conflict within the family members about how to proceed. And some kind of personal experience on my part is I experienced three kinds of death in my life personally. And one was a sudden death, a motor vehicle accident of my brother when I was 16 years old, which of course was horrendous. And then I experienced the death of my mother, who had to go into hospital suddenly and had multiple issues going on, and a healthcare team that wasn't really listening, and no advanced care directives, and people are in denial. My brother's in denial. My father's in denial. They're trying to keep her alive. The outcome's not going to be good. And it was horrendous. And then the death of my father, which was beautiful. We cared for him at home. He had like everything in place, all his family around him, beautiful music playing. He wasn't in any pain. And it was a really good death. So if everybody knows our prior wishes, and we could have a little bit of control over a situation that might be like right out of our control, why wouldn't we do that, right? But we just don't want to think about our own deaths. Like, it's just something like, ooh, I don't want to go there. Or, there's a superstition, maybe I'll bring something bad upon myself if I think this way. But it's just so important, having done this work for as long as I have, that if you can, contemplate things like, do I want to be put on life support? Do I want feeding tubes and IVs and antibiotic drugs and everything, put into my system to prolong an outcome that may not be for the best? It's like, if we can write these things down and let our people know, things will go a lot smoother. So having said that, there are some things that are really important at the end of life for individuals who are dying. And decisions can be made about what they want to do. Arrangements for the family can be finalized, as well as plans for burial and cremation. If we have these difficult conversations ahead of time, everybody will know what the person wants. It allows a person to talk about how they would like to spend their final days. And there's kind of four significant areas that are really important for the person that's dying. One is asking for or giving forgiveness. If there's anything outstanding in terms of a relationship that hasn't gone well, or a divorce that didn't go well, or they're not speaking to one of their children, they're estranged. If they feel like there's any way or anything they need to do with that, that's like really important. So, and we can help facilitate that when we care for them, by asking them if they want to write a letter or want us to videotape something they can leave behind, to be able to say goodbye. So asking for and giving forgiveness is important. Also to know that they were loved and that they have been loved in return. And I would say that's probably the most important thing in the end of life, is to feel like that they were able to give love and receive in return. Also saying thank you and showing gratitude to others for a life well lived, and be able to have family and friends come and do that as well. And then lastly, saying goodbye. Saying goodbye to the people that have mattered to them is very important to facilitate. So then when dying is not discussed, it prevents the individual from having closure in their lives. And the closure piece is very, very important. Dying comfortably in an environment that's peaceful, surrounded by family, friends, and feeling their love is ultimately the best death scenario. Of course, a bad death, in contrast, would be one in which violence or severe pain or torture, or dying alone, or being kept alive against your wishes, or loss of dignity and being unable to let your wishes be known. These deaths can be very traumatizing for the dying and their families, as well as healthcare providers to watch from the sidelines. Similarly, if there's a lack of acceptance on the part of the dying or their family, that can be really stressful. I remember when my mother was dying in hospital, my brother and my father weren't really ready to let her go on any way. So they were wanting all like acute medical interventions, anything. She was 87 years old. And so they were pumping her full of antibiotics. And every time I went in the room, she was praying to like for God to take her. So I feel like we were prolonging a life against her wishes. And because that hadn't really been priorly stated or anything, my brother and my father thought they were doing the right thing, that they were trying everything they could to save her. And yet she was the one who wanted to go because she had had it. So it's really important to tune in to that, but also to encourage our loved ones as well as ourselves to be putting these things in writing or to be having a discussion, even though it can be difficult. So communication, as I've talked about, is the key. We do not have to be at the end of life to have these discussions with others about what our wishes are. And in fact, it's better to have those thoughts and discussions when we're still healthy. And, you know, just even like the environment, like, do we want to die at home? Like, not everybody wants to die at home. Some people feel more comfortable dying in hospital where there can be, you know, 24-hour around the clock treatment and not burden our family members to be our caregivers. Other people would rather be at home with their family and friends and people that are familiar to them, or to die in a hospice bed where they have that extra level of care and compassion that they might not be getting in a hospital, but still aren't quite, you know, in the home, maybe not with the same access of care. So it's important to give these things some serious thought. When I thought about good death, bad death, and end of life issues, I came across this book. It's called Final Gifts. And if you have never read this and you're interested in death and dying and the experience, I really recommend it. I have no affiliation with this book. I don't even know these people who wrote it, but they're two palliative care nurses, and they just wrote about their experiences on death and dying. And oh my goodness, like, after seeing it in so many different capacities, they were just so right on. And they talked a lot about sort of some of the signs that you would see in your loved one when they were getting ready to make that transition from life to death. And there is a transition period that goes on. So one of the things they talk about is you might see the dying person talking about how they need to prepare for travel. So they might tell you, oh, So you have to get my plane tickets because I've got to get on that plane. It's leaving tomorrow at noon and I have to be on it. It's so easy when you hear that to kind of write the person off and say, wow, they're really confused, or maybe they've had way too many medication, because obviously they're not in any position to be taking a plane. This actually happened to me with my father, who was a really well-traveled businessman. He traveled all over the world when he was working, and when he was dying, he was 89 at home. He woke up frantic one night and he said, Leslie, you've got to find my passport. You have to find my passport. I need to see my passport. So this man was meticulous, and his passport was in the front pocket of his briefcase all of whenever I can remember him for all my life. And he would take it out, put it in his suit jacket, go through customs, and as soon as he could, it went back into the front pocket. So I knew exactly where it was, and I tried to reassure him. Nope, he had to see it. So I had to go in the middle of the night and scrounge around and find his briefcase, and sure enough, there was the passport. And as soon as I got it to him and put it beside his bed with his briefcase, he calmed right down. And I didn't realize this at the time, because I had not come across this book yet, that this was one of the signs of preparing to leave. In fact, he did most of the things that they write about in this book. The nurses in this book talk about this one case where this young girl was dying of leukemia, and she was dying at home, and her parents had actually her personal room was downstairs, and the parents moved her upstairs because they were worried she was getting weak, and so they were afraid that they couldn't hear her in the nighttime if she should call. And so they moved her upstairs to this room, and she just started thrashing around and flailing around. So the parents put in this frantic call to these nurses, palliative nurses, to come right away, because they couldn't figure out what was wrong. She kept talking about a map, and where's the map? And I can't find the map. I need the map. So they were frantically running up and down the stairs, trying to put things in her room that were familiar, because maybe the change had set her off. They weren't really sure. Her father actually went out and got a map of the community in case she thought she needed to go somewhere in the community, wasn't sure. And the nurses came in and they just took one look at her, an assessment. They sat down, they held her hand, they calmed her down, and they just said, they just reassured her that she has everything she'll need at the time. She won't need a map. She'll know where to go. She'll be guided. She'll be fine. And she calmed right down and died the next day. So, I mean, there are these signs to watch for. The presence of someone not alive. So I referred to that earlier in the presentation, that oftentimes people will talk about people that come to see them, people that may have passed on before that you recognize. Like, so my father's brother died before he did, and my father's brother was coming all the time to visit him. He was always telling me, oh, George was here last night, George was here. And at one point he had a whole band that came in, was playing music for him. And it's just so easy to write this off, but if you understand it as part of the transitioning process and you don't shut your person down, but actually leave space for them to talk about, it's very reassuring to them, because these people that have come to help them on their transcendence or their journey, if you will, they're often really comforting, very comforting times for the people that are dying. So it's important to not write them off as confused or think they've had too many meds, but that we see this all the time. I was just watching on the weekend a documentary on Audrey Hepburn, the movie star. I was a big fan of hers, and it's a very good documentary. In the end, it talked about her dying of colon cancer, and she was alone with her son in the room, who she adored. And she said to him, Sean, the people are here to take me. They're sitting right beside you. They're here to take me, and I have to go soon, right? So you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And he reassured her that he would be okay, and she died the next morning. So I just, because of what I do for a living, of course, I tuned into that really quickly and just thought, even Audrey Hepburn had people to come and help her cross over. So that's nice. Seeing a place. So in the book Final Gifts, they also talk about this woman, and I've seen this too in my own work, who was an ardent atheist, like her whole life. She was an economist, a businesswoman. She was very practical in the way she approached life, and she really believed that after you died, you ceased to exist. And her daughter kind of took on the same philosophy as her mom. They were very close. And her daughter was her caregiver at end of life. And her mother just kept talking all of a sudden about, oh my gosh, I'm seeing this lovely place all the time. I can't wait to get to it. I'm seeing this lovely place. And the daughter was really shaken up by this because she said, my mom is not a believer. But when the nurses were able to just reassure her caregiver, her daughter, that people see this and they talk about it. So if you can, let her have some space to describe it to you. And so she did, and they actually had some really good experiences together towards the end of life. And her daughter, in the end, after she passed, actually felt better that maybe there was some place her mother was. Who knows, right? Nobody knows, but that maybe for whatever reasons she saw it and that she just didn't exist into blackness. It was more reassuring for her. Knowing when the death will occur. They talk about this in the book as well, and also I've seen it from my own work, that sometimes people can tell you exactly when they're going to go. There's an example in the book about this one gentleman who was really into football, and so was his family. They were a big football family. So he drew out this whole play, this whole like football strategic play, and in the end, he circled it with an arrow and said his name and said he'll be out of there by noon on Sunday. And so the family were looking at this play and they were laughing because it was so him. But then they were like, look, he put an arrow with an exit that he'd be out of here on Sunday at noon. Sure enough, that's exactly when he went. So it's just interesting to kind of tune into that. There was one example in the book where there was a gentleman who owned a big sailboat, and he had sailed all over the world, and that was his great love and passion. And the nurses came to visit him at bedside, and he said, hey, how's the tide today? What are the tides doing right now? And the nurse said, well, we don't really read tides. We don't know anything about tides, but we can find out for you. He goes, oh, don't worry about it. I'm not going to be here when you come next time. And he wasn't. So there you go. He figured out the tides himself. Needing reconciliation and peace. So we talked a little bit about that earlier, just processing regrets, making sure if there's any unfinished business or any like worries that they're having, to help the people that are dying and passing to take care of that. And that's again why, we talk a lot about having your affairs in order, like the wills, the advanced care planning, your prior wishes, your powers of attorney. Everybody knows what's going to happen and they're all on the same page and they know where to get documentation. All of that is just so helpful to the people that are left behind. Also to feel like in your last days of your life, at your end of life, that they were able to participate in delivering that exactly as you had requested. And that's huge peace of mind for the loved ones left. So those are just some of the things to look for at the end of life. So how are we doing for time? So we have a bit of time. So I'm just gonna just open it up randomly to questions if people have any for me about any of what we've been talking about or I've been talking about.
If you have a question, just put up your hand and take yourself off mute and go ahead.
I have a quick question, but it's more of just a professional kind of curiosity around your work and how you manage it all. So I'm living in beautiful Victoria and I'm a registered clinical counsellor over here. And for many, 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 many years, I've wanted to work in palliative care. But I just don't really know how to get there, whether I plan for a slow transition or whether I just jump in or, yeah, how it would all work.
So in terms of your clinical background, has it been just basically mental health or have you had medical, clinical?
Yeah, it's actually part of the reason why I'm interested in it. I've worked mostly in corrections, so doing case management. and working with some high-risk men, like out of prison into community, as well as like a lot of family violence work. And so dealing with shame and regret for offences is a big part of it. And then working with clients I've had who have had a terminal illness and then naturally have felt really horrible about their lives and the things they've done. That's kind of where the seed was sown for me.
Oh, wow. With that background, you'll be amazing. Because, you know, so much of the work in helping people have a peaceful death is helping them process the shame, the guilt, you know, because regrets, like on the deathbed, they're not saying, oh, I should have bought that Porsche. I have a big regret about that I never, you know, had that beautiful sports car. No, they're talking about all the relationships they screwed up, or the love they held back, or the shame they have around something they had done. And that's why I say, you know, my God, what a gift they've taught me how to live my life. So I think that if you've already had a background in doing that kind of resolution work, it should be a great fit for you. And I have to tell you, this work is sacred. Like, you feel so blessed every day to be walking this last journey with people. It's just such an honor. And I know it might not be for everybody, but I think if you have an inkling that you might have something to give or have something to share there, that I would say jump in, do it. Yeah.
Thank you, Eugene. I have a question, Leslie. So I know I have some family members who have a very hard time talking about death. And the second that I mention it, their head goes down and, you know, they just shut off. So you talk a lot about communication. So what's your advice on approaching that communication with those family members that are really like, no way, don't talk to me about this?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot because of how death avoidant of a society we are, and you know, work with a lot of people who are caregiving like their elderly folks. And my parents were like that. Like, I could not get them to talk about their wishes. Everything was in secret. Like, they had to have, like, you know, I didn't really know, which is unfortunate because I feel like I could have been way more effective, especially in my mom's death, if I had had some direction around it. But that just taught me how much more important it is. I think you can gently introduce things like, just from your experience, maybe in like not an aggressive way, but like almost like a passive way. Oh, you know, I took this course on advanced care directives, and this is what I've learned. And see if you can help them join in kind of like a more you know, a more casual approach to it, something that might maybe you own, and that you're not saying you need to do this and you need to do that, because like our seniors don't react well to that, right? I mean, we have to treat them with respect and with dignity, and that they have the right and have earned the right to go out the way they want. But if we can just educate them from the standpoint of maybe what we're going to do with ourselves, that might make them think, whoa, that might be a good idea. Yeah. And it, you know, it's just so important. I mean, and I know that these conversations are so difficult. And sometimes with our seniors, like, they really respect like the medical profession. So sometimes I say to the caregivers, like, maybe they'll agree to you like just attending like a little discussion with the doctor. Because you know, he is the one to talk a lot about sort of end of life treatments and what do you want, and do you want CPR, do you want to be intubated, do you want to be put on life support, like all these intrusive things that they do to you if you don't have your wishes known, right? So maybe, you know, trying to join in a conversation with the doctor's support is another way. Did that answer your question? Sorry.
It did. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Dawn? And then Winter's next.
He's muted.
Oh,
You're
sorry,
muted.
Dawn, can't hear you.
Oh,
There we go.
now, oh, thanks. So Leslie, especially this last year and going forward for this year forward, things are looking a lot better as far as COVID and all the related matters to that. But it's going to be a different year still going forward in that. And what you're talking about is that's a lot of personal communication. Like, what about how do we deal with for example, I have an elderly aunt who's incapacitated. She lives in Regina, and she's in a very excellent care home there. But we have this distance. Won't come out here, and I can't go out there, type of thing. We talk every morning by phone. But like how it's hard to talk about what we're talking about over Skype or over Zoom or something like that. I guess it can be done, but what are you finding out in that, like with families and trying to deal with these things when in a lot of cases families cannot even have a direct contact with the person in that situation?
Yeah, so COVID has put a whole nother layer on this, right? On everything, like on complicating people's death, on complicating people's grieving process, on complicating these conversations that we can't have face to face that need to be had. Are you power of attorney for your aunt?
I am, yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Good. So, I think I would try and do it over like Zoom or Skype and just say, as your power of attorney, I just want to make sure that I'm completely going to represent you in all of everything that you want at the end of life, and see if you can have that conversation. Unfortunately, would I say fly out there, sit at her bedside, hold her hand and have this conversation? Absolutely, but we can't with COVID. So we have to resort to the next best thing. I would rather have you all in a room where I'm presenting to you in person, but this is the next best thing, right? So I would try and have that conversation via Skype or phone. I don't know if the nurses can help her with a face-to-face visit or.
Well, we used to Skype, but she's again she's got a bit of vascular dementia, and there's better days than others. So she had an iPad which she could Zoom on, or Skype on, but now she can't do that. And so we did try it once. The facility where she's at, they have their own system where they would bring their iPad in. So anytime we want to schedule a Skype or Zoom, they would do that. So we did it once, but there's somebody else there. And it's different. It's not private, and it's so we had a good Zoom or Skype, I think it was, but she wasn't interested in doing it anymore. And we used to do it all the time, just because it was too much commotion. There's another person. That's her words. It'd be another person there.
Yeah.
So I know, like in my case, so when I'm going to be vaccinated in another 2 weeks. She's vaccinated, and then my wife and me will go out as soon as we can, because she can have visitors outside, and hopefully by then she might have them inside. So we'd have that personal contact, but it's still, it's still going forward. It's been a really difficult year, this last year. In just sort of dealing with this, this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really talking, really having a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, COVID has been so challenging. I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yes, you are for some reason.
Is that better?
Yep.
Is that better?
Oh, still feedback.
Sounds like I'm